My name is Belinda Kelly, and I am 40 years old. I have a precious family. There is my mother, who gave birth to me and raised me, my husband, Connor, who is 2 years older than me, and our daughter, Benny, who just turned 7 this year. I want to continue living peacefully and happily with these three. That is my wish. I have been divorced. That was 9 years ago. My ex-husband, Greg, is 5 years older than me and works for a fairly good company. We didn't have any children, but we lived happily together. At least, I thought we were happy, but it seems I was the only one who felt that way. Shockingly, Greg was having an affair with my sister, Nancy. Nancy is 3 years older than me. She has always had to be number one and constantly competed with me. To put it bluntly, she has a nasty personality. This sister of mine stole my husband. Misfortunes often come in pairs because around the same time, my mother was diagnosed with a disease. She was given 6 months to live. There was a treatment, but it would cost a fortune. My world went dark. My mother, trying to reassure me, put on a brave smile, which only made her look more pitiful. I informed my sister, who only came to the house when she needed money, about this, but her reaction was cold. To make matters worse, she confessed her affair with Greg and announced she was pregnant with his child. My mother's care is your responsibility now. I'll be happy with Greg. Those were the last words I heard from my sister. When I rushed home, Greg's belongings were gone, and divorce papers were on the table. No matter how many times I called, he never answered. Eloping, that word flashed through my mind. I immediately submitted the divorce papers and focused on what I could do. Now, here we are. Is your mom still alive? We've had a child since then and are living happily. Unlike you. Yeah. Breaking up with you was the best decision ever. You must be a lonely single now, huh? I ran into the last people I ever wanted to see again. While visiting a department store with my family, I unexpectedly came across Greg and Nancy. Luckily, I was with just my mother, while my husband and daughter were elsewhere. The two of them laughed crudely, boasting about how happy they were. Even after 9 years, they recognized us instantly, which I found surprisingly calm. I couldn't bear to listen and tried to ignore them and walk away. But my mother, unable to tolerate their remarks, suddenly spoke up. Well, this is perfect. Let me introduce my 10-year-old company worth $240 million and my adorable grandchild. What? Greg and Nancy looked dumbfounded. I was shocked, understanding what my mother was hinting at. Mom, let's go. The others are waiting. I pulled my mother's arm and quickly left the scene, ignoring the piercing stares from Greg and Nancy. After putting some distance between us, we finally relaxed on a different floor. Mom, why did you say that? Now it's going to be even more troublesome. I'm sorry. But they were mocking us so much, I couldn't stand it. Especially when it wasn't just about me. I appreciate your sentiment. Thank you for standing up for us. As I comforted my dejected mother, I recalled the faces of the people I thought I'd never see again. The two who once plunged my mother and me into misery. Seeing them here made me wonder if they lived nearby. This area has high rents. They didn't look particularly shabby. I had no idea what they were doing for work now. Even though they bragged about having a child, there was no sign of the child. Were they leaving the child home alone? My mind kept turning over these thoughts. I clenched my fists tightly. I didn't want them to take anything more from me. I didn't want my current happiness to be disturbed. I needed to protect what was dear to me. And I was now strong enough to do it. I made up my mind. This time, I will be thorough. I quickly reunited with my husband and daughter and headed home. We discussed what happened today and planned our next steps. First, let's find out what they're up to now. Their jobs, where they're living, and how they've been living these past 9 years. We should hire a private investigator. Also, we need to be careful with Benny. Even though we didn't see them today, we never know when they might show up again. We should try to pick her up and drop her off as much as possible. Belinda, try not to be alone too much. Yeah. I'm sorry for dragging you into this. It's fine. You don't need to feel guilty. After all, it's your ex-sister and ex-husband. They betrayed and abandoned you and your mom. I know they're not worth anything. So let's be thorough. Make sure they never think of coming near us again. Connor's eyes were burning with quiet anger. He was angry for my sake. I didn't want to waste his feelings. Yes, if we were going to do this, we had to be thorough. I remembered the words my mother couldn't help but say to Nancy and Greg. A 10-year-old company worth $240 million. Even with just that bit of information, it would be easy to find out what she was talking about these days. She was talking about my company, where I serve as CEO. 10 years ago, a year before divorcing Greg, I started my own business. I had told Greg about it at the time, but he barely listened. He had no interest in anything I said and saw me only as a housekeeper. He probably thought I was joking when I mentioned starting a business. After the divorce, I threw myself into my work. Thanks to my efforts, the company grew rapidly. It is now a prominent player in the industry. All the money I earned went towards my mother's treatment. At first, she hesitated, but when she saw I wouldn't back down, she focused on her treatment. After 6 months, then a year, then 2 years, she fully recovered. During my career, I unexpectedly met my current husband, Connor. Connor worked for one of our business partners. After what happened with Greg and Nancy, I had trust issues with men, but Connor gently helped me heal. I fell in love at first sight, he once said, blushing. It felt natural to want to spend the rest of my life with him. We got married and were blessed with our daughter, Benny. Greg and Nancy used to think I was infertile. I suggested to Greg that we go to the hospital together, but he refused to listen. Looking back, I'm glad he didn't. Thanks to that, I now have a wonderful family. Now, I live in a prime location in the city with my mother, husband, and daughter. Connor lost his parents early, so he treats my mother with the same love as if she were his own. My mother retired early after her illness and now stays active around the house and attends lectures, having a vibrant life. Benny adores her grandmother and often clings to her, playing and calling her Grandma, Grandma. We have a picture-perfect, happy family. My family. I would do anything to protect it. A week later, I received a preliminary report on the investigation into Greg and Nancy. As I was reading it, the doorbell rang. I checked the intercom monitor and was startled for a moment. There were Greg and Nancy, making a racket with their loud, obnoxious voices. Belinda! Can you hear me? Open up! Your dear sister has come all this way to see you. Are you in there? I see you changed your last name, so you got married again? Couldn't you be satisfied with one marriage? Oh, right, it was a failure. No satisfaction in that, huh? Yeah, open up. Let us in. What kind of rich guy did you cozy up to get a house this big? 3 stories. Way too good for you. And that car outside looks expensive. An imported car? Seriously, no decent guy would be interested in a plain, unremarkable girl like you. It must be some chubby, bald old man. Mom mentioned something about a grandkid, but with your genes and some old guy, the kid can't be much. The house was surrounded by high walls, and they were ringing the intercom at the gate. They hadn't set foot on the property yet. How they could keep babbling on without me even being there was beyond me. Their presence was a blemish on the quiet, upscale neighborhood. Instead of fear, I felt exasperation. A few days ago, reports of suspicious individuals had circulated in the neighborhood. A middle-aged man and woman were seen lurking around. I suspected it was Greg and Nancy, and I was right. They must have searched everywhere. What a hassle. I glanced upstairs. My mother, husband, and daughter were playing on the second floor. I sent a discreet message to Connor and pressed the call button on the intercom. The video and audio were being recorded. "Who is this?" I asked calmly. They froze for a moment before both started talking at once. "Oh, finally. Took you long enough. I'm exhausted. Let us rest. Looks like you're living the high life." "Yeah. We searched everywhere to find you. I'm tired too. With a house this grand, it shouldn't be a problem to let us in to rest." "Let us in." I could hear the sound of them shaking the gate. Their suspicious behavior was likely to get reported by the neighbors before I could call the authorities. "Who are you? And what do you mean by searched everywhere?" I played dumb, asking again. My words only made them angrier. "Come on. It's me, Nancy. Your blood-related sister. The woman who met her fate with Greg, your ex-husband, 9 years ago. Are you saying you've forgotten your own sister? Was your memory always this bad? Unbelievable. Quit playing dumb. You know exactly who we are. Stop stalling and open up. Do you know how much trouble we went through to find you? We followed you the other day and asked around this area until we finally found this place. We never expected you to be living in such a grand house. Just let us in already. We'll talk after that." "Is that so? Well, I have nothing to discuss with you, so I'm not letting you in. You should leave." I replied coldly, sensing their momentary gasp. They clearly didn't expect such a response. They thought a bit of pressure would make me comply. How naive. I have no obligation to listen to you. We're not family anymore. Why should I follow your orders? And your attitude is disgraceful. Do you think I'll open the door if you speak to me like that? You should go home for your own good." "What? How dare you? You're getting a little uppity, and now you think you can talk back? You should shut up and do as I say. That's all you're good for anyway. Belinda, you've gotten so arrogant, huh? Have you forgotten how I took care of you? You couldn't even do housework, and I gave you food and shelter. Open the gate now, or I'll break it down and force my way in." Greg's kick echoed against the gate. I frowned at the clear threat. "Uppity? Where? You've always been condescending. And have I ever followed your orders? Maybe as a child, but 9 years ago, you and Greg ran away together, right? I didn't comply, you two just left. Honestly, I was glad to see you both go." "What the?" "Sure, it was tough afterward, with work and Mom's illness, but things went smoother without you. So thanks for leaving. If only you had stayed gone. Coming here to flaunt yourselves is just stupid. I consider you both dead. Nothing you say will make me comply. I can deal with you easily now." "How dare you speak to me like that? And stop pretending we're family. It's disgusting. You have your own family that you chose over me. I'm no longer your family. Compared to the sister you claim to be, you're even more of a stranger. How could I not find you revolting? What did you say? And you say you took care of me, but you hardly contributed to our living expenses. You worked for a good company, but started saying it was my job to save money and even begrudged giving a cent. Meanwhile, you were lavishing your mistress with money. Where did it come from? Did you take out loans?" As I pointed this out, they both fell silent. I had already investigated and found out that both of them were in debt. Greg had been showering Nancy with money, and it was easy to imagine that their lifestyle hadn't changed since they ran off together. Greg had quit the company he worked at after the divorce. It was a true elopement. But, of course, they needed money to live, and I had already learned that Greg had gotten a job at another company sometime later. Apparently, Nancy was now working in the nightlife industry. Even though she's getting on in years, there must still be some demand if she looks hard enough. Their reason for contacting me now was likely to beg for money. But they hadn't mentioned anything about my job or company. From what my mother had said, they hadn't even bothered to look into it. Maybe they didn't listen to or remember my mother's words at all. They really seemed to believe I was living off my current husband's wealth. Moreover, they kept making derogatory remarks about him. Did they think I'd relay their words to my husband and beg for money for them? Were they planning to use family ties as an excuse to extort money from me? These people were beyond saving. I sighed as Greg and Nancy continued to rant and rave. Just then, I noticed the sound of police sirens getting closer.
What? Hey! What the? You didn't call the cops on me, did you?
On the contrary, why did you think I wouldn't call the police? You made such a big fuss in front of someone's house. I had called the police a little while ago. As the sirens got closer, Greg and Nancy panicked and ran away. Even they were afraid of the police. After that, I explained the situation to the officers who arrived. The neighborhood association president, who had heard the commotion, also showed up. After discussing it with the police and the association president, we decided to share descriptions of Greg and Nancy with the neighbors as a precaution. The police and the association president were very sympathetic and told me to reach out if I ever needed help. I can't believe they actually showed up here. Connor, who had joined the discussion, said in exasperation. But I don't think those two will give up that easily. Also, it's concerning that there's no sign of their child. According to the investigation, they indeed have one child. Judging by the age, it must be the child Nancy was pregnant with at that time. I decided to further the investigation and remain vigilant about our surroundings. A few days later, Greg and Nancy showed up at my company.
Get the president out here. Belinda Kelly. She's the president of this company, right? I'm Belinda's sister. We don't look alike, but I am her sister. Blood-related sisters. Family. You should understand that. Who do you think you are, trying to keep family apart? Yeah, she's the president's sister. Which means she's family. If you disrespect her, you'll lose your job. Get Belinda out here now.
Excuse me, what's all this noise about? I called out to Greg and Nancy, who were making a scene at the reception desk. The receptionist looked at me with a troubled expression. When they noticed me appear behind them, they quickly turned around.
Oh, finally. You're really the president of this company. I couldn't believe it, but when we looked into it, it's true. Just like Mom said, 10 years in business and making $240 million a year. I thought you were just living off a man, but did you build that mansion yourself? I didn't think you had started a company. You kept that from me, didn't you? But it looks like you've been very successful. This means you can help us without any problem.
Excuse me, security. Can you escort these two out? I spoke to the burly security guard who had been watching the situation. He nodded silently and moved behind the two. The soundless movement startled Greg and Nancy.
Wait! Didn't you hear? I'm her family. Do you think you can get away with laying hands on the president's family?
That's not for you to decide.
You were cold last time too. Don't you have any compassion? With $240 million, you could help us out a little.
Why should I help you? What obligation do I have? The commotion at the company entrance attracted the attention of employees. I could have handled this in a private meeting room, but this was perfect. Greg and Nancy causing a scene, and me dealing with them calmly. I wanted everyone to see this. No worries, the trust I've built won't be shaken by such a minor uproar. Most employees probably remember the warning about these two that we circulated internally. So, what do you want? What are you trying to achieve?
Well, we need help. With everything.
Everything?
Everything is everything. You have money, right? So help us.
Oh, I see. So, you're just asking for money? I sighed, and Nancy's face turned bright red. But she quickly recovered.
Yeah, money. We need money. Can't you see? We're in trouble. Just help us out. If we had money, everything would be fine. Hey, Nancy.
Greg was flustered by Nancy's outburst, but she glared at him and he froze.
Shut up. This is all your fault. You quit that good-paying job. You didn't have to quit. Even if people knew about the affair, you could have kept working. Then you finally found another job, but it's boring and pays little. Now I have to work too.
What? You're the one who spent all my savings. You wasted it all. Who was the one running around and not taking care of the kid?
I was planning to be a housewife. You didn't tell me you were quitting. I had to have the kid because it was too late to abort. If you're my husband, you should support me. And I thought you were better than Belinda. More beautiful and charming. But all you talk about is money. I didn't know you were so greedy. You tricked me. This is practically fraud.
Their argument was loud and annoying. In the end, they only cared about themselves. The company you work for now, that's the one, right? When I mentioned the company name, Greg's eyes widened. How do you know? Because that company is a valued subcontractor for us.
What?
I hear you've been bullying subordinates and slacking off. Even if others think the job is unimportant, it's very valuable. How could you not understand that? This information came from the investigation report. Greg's current employer is a subcontractor for my company. Realizing this, Greg started to panic. That can't be. You didn't even know that? Maybe you should take your job more seriously. I don't have the power to fire him directly. But the company might decide he's causing problems and terminate him. I looked at Nancy. You bragged about being happy when we met recently, but that was just a front. If you were truly happy, you wouldn't be begging me for money. Well, I've investigated you too. Your child, John, right? There are rumors of neglect, both in the neighborhood and at school. What? Neglect? You don't know anything about my situation. Nancy's eyes widened.
I work hard every day. I don't have time to care for an unwanted kid. She should be grateful for having a place to live. I don't care about her. If I knew it would be like this, I wouldn't have had an affair with Greg. Why are you, the one who was dumped, living better? Mom is still alive and doing well. My life shouldn't be like this.
That's your fault, isn't it? Do you know the term self-inflicted? I was exasperated. You chose to have an affair, have a child, and live your life. You need to take responsibility for that.
It was a mistake. Everything was a mistake. Hey, take this idiot back and give me money. Or give me your position. Let's trade. Don't be ridiculous.
I scolded Nancy for her self-centered, childish thinking.
I've been saying this, but we are strangers now. You abandoned me and Mom. You're selfish and stupid. I don't even want to think about being related to someone like you. Don't ever show up in front of me or my family again. If you do, I won't hesitate to take legal action. What? Are you saying you're abandoning your family? Not just me, but my child too.
We're not family anymore, and don't bring up your child only when it's convenient. It's disgusting. I gave a signal to the security guard. He promptly grabbed the still screaming Nancy and the trembling Greg and threw them out. I had already called the police, so they arrived quickly, leaving no chance for the two to escape. They were sternly warned by the officers. I apologized to my employees and instructed them to return to work. I knew this wasn't the end. Determined, I clenched my fists and prepared for what was to come. Later, I received a report from the investigator that Greg and Nancy had been reported for child neglect. They had been planning to keep causing trouble by using my name, but after being harshly scolded by the police, they lost their spirit. They tried to grovel and plead with me, but I ignored them completely. Greg was fired from his job because of the rumors that he had caught my attention. His dismissal was welcomed, as he was already disliked by many. He quickly became depressed. Nancy, having lived an unhealthy lifestyle for years, fell ill. With no money for medical treatment, she has become a shut-in. Their child, John, was placed in one of the childcare facilities under my company's umbrella. It was only natural, given that Greg and Nancy were incapable of properly raising her. To prevent them from causing further trouble, I arranged for them to take on harsh, live-in jobs. Providing them with work, how kind of me. Meanwhile, my family and I continued to live a life of smooth sailing. After the recent chaos, I planned to take a break and go on a family vacation soon. The company was thriving, and we were planning to expand overseas in the near future.
Thank you so much, Molly, for having our child. I'm so happy I could have Tim's baby. I can't wait for us to live together as a family of 3.
Molly looked up at Tim with adoration. Although she came to celebrate the joyous occasion of giving birth to the beloved Molly, it seems there was a shocking betrayal.
I will never forgive this,
I muttered to myself in a voice so low that the 2 in the hospital room couldn't hear. Then, I burst open the door of the room. Tim's face was filled with astonishment upon noticing my presence.
Nora! Why are you here? There's a reason for this.
Tim was clearly flustered. However, Molly was smirking at an angle Tim couldn't see. Surely, she had intentionally called me to this scene. I decided to say with a forced smile to both of them, "Congratulations. The baby is adorable." And with that, I left the room. I won't let Molly have her way. I was determined for revenge and immediately set into action. I am Nora. This year, I turned 36. I work in sales at a major life insurance company. It's mostly women around, and the incentives are substantial. Hard work every day leads to sales performance, and it was the perfect job for me. And I have one best friend. That's Molly. We became friends in college. Molly was the cutest girl. She had her hair curled inward and dressed like a lady. That's why she was very popular among men, and sometimes she was even called out for dates. Molly was good at flattering men. When Molly looked up and asked for something, most men would give in. Often, she got a smart friend to let her copy their lecture notes. Thanks to that, she managed to keep up good grades, which I envied. I, on the other hand, was not popular at all. I never had a boyfriend, nor have I ever been on a date. I preferred casual clothes like jeans and hoodies. The reason why Molly and I, who are complete opposites, became friends was due to a certain incident. It was during a lecture. The lecture involved making groups among students. As everyone else quickly formed groups, Molly was left sitting alone. Because she didn't have any friends at that time. Thus, she couldn't find a partner. Molly looked somewhat uncomfortable. That's when I asked her, "Want to partner up?" Molly looked at me hesitantly. "Are you sure you want to be with me?"
Of course,
I answered with a smile. From there, Molly and I became close and spent a lot of time together. For me, who didn't have many friends, Molly was like a best friend. Despite concerns from a few friends, I chose to continue being friends with Molly. Although it seemed Molly occasionally had trouble with men, she treated me just fine. After graduating from college, we both became busy and our communication decreased. However, the fact that we are important friends hasn't changed. I want to cherish that going forward. I met my husband, Tim, after I started working. The meeting was through an acquaintance's introduction. Worried about my lack of encounters, the acquaintance hosted a dinner party. By chance, Tim sat next to me at the party. Tim talked to me in a friendly manner. For me, who had little interaction with men before, this was very refreshing. After the dinner party ended, Tim approached me. "Nora, I thought you were the cutest." Would you mind if we exchanged contact information? Tim said, smiling. No one had ever said such things to me before. Men in my college days always cared only about Molly. I was like air to them. With Tim, I felt he saw me as an individual. Believing this, I responded, "Yes. Of course." After that, we went on several dates and started dating. About a year into our relationship, Tim proposed to me. I was convinced that I could be happy with Tim. And now, 4 years into our marriage, life with Tim is going smoothly. I continued working even after marriage at Tim's request. "Could you work until we have a child? I'd like to save up a bit for our future together."
Of course. I'll do my best.
I thought Tim's request was only reasonable, and I've been working hard at my current job. And just recently, we bought a new house. We had been renting an apartment right after getting married, but a property close to our parents' house came on the market. The 35-year mortgage is tough, but I'm thrilled we have our own home. Our married life seems smooth sailing, but there's one concern. We haven't been able to conceive. Even after 4 years of marriage, we've been unable to have a child. Many families live in our neighborhood, and I often see babies around. Initially, Tim was encouraging, but lately, he hasn't said much. He probably doesn't want to get my hopes up unnecessarily. Thinking this, my heart feels a bit heavy. One day, while checking my social media as usual, I received a direct message. It was from Molly. She wanted to catch up after a long time. Feeling nostalgic and happy, I replied. Molly seems to be living at her parents' home now. And coincidentally, we found out that her parents' house and mine are close, so we decided she would come over to my place on the promised Sunday.
It's been a while, Nora.
Your new house is lovely. Molly greeted me with a smile as soon as she arrived.
Thanks. Let me introduce you. This is my husband, Tim.
I introduced Tim, who was next to me, to Molly. I had already told Molly about my marriage beforehand.
Wow, what a wonderful husband. Nice to meet you, I'm Nora's best friend, Molly.
Molly introduced herself with a bright smile. Then, Tim's cheeks turned a bit red. Nora has such a cute friend. You must be really popular, right? Tim talked to Molly with a grin. After that, the three of us chatted pleasantly. Then, Molly made a suggestion. How about we start a group chat for the three of us? That way, we can keep in touch easily. I really enjoyed talking with Tim, what do you think? Molly was confident, as if it was a brilliant idea. Yeah. I felt a bit troubled. I wasn't sure about Tim's feelings, and it might be awkward for him. As I was pondering what to say, Tim leaned in.
That sounds great. I'd love to talk more with Molly.
Tim was smiling cheerfully. And so, we decided to start a group chat among the three of us. I was concerned about Tim being so enthusiastic, but maybe he was just trying to be considerate, knowing I don't have many friends. I decided not to worry about Tim's reaction. However, we hardly exchanged messages in the group chat. Maybe Molly is busy too. I didn't think much of it and carried on. Recently, something has been bothering me. Tim's return time from work has become extremely late. Until now, he would be home by 9 p.m. at the latest. But lately, he often comes home around 2 a.m. Sometimes, he even stays out until morning. He also started going out more on weekends, and I saw him less and less. This is definitely strange. I decided to talk to Tim when he was at home.
Tim, can I talk to you for a sec?
Sure, what's up? Tim seemed normal, as always. Wondering if I was worrying too much, I asked him.
You've been coming home late recently, haven't you? I was wondering if something was up.
Then, Tim laughed and explained.
Yeah, I've been assigned as the leader of a new project. It's a pretty big project with a tight deadline. I've been glued to the computer working on it.
Hearing Tim's response made me feel relieved. He answered right away without any signs of being upset. I decided to trust Tim.
I see. Don't overdo it, okay?
Tim smiled, looking relieved. Thanks. The project should be finished by next month. I think I'll be back to my usual return time then, Tim said, patting my head. However, even after a month, Tim didn't return home early. If anything, he spent even less time at home.
I thought things would go back to normal.
My heart was restless. Then, a few months later, as my relationship with Tim grew colder, Molly brought some happy news. It happened one evening after work. I saw a missed call on my smartphone. Looking at the caller ID, I muttered to myself,
"It's from Molly."
I found it unusual to get a call from Molly and called her back right away. Luckily, Molly picked up immediately.
"Nora? Sorry, I haven't been in touch much. How have you been?"
Hearing Molly's usual cheerful voice was comforting. Tim's behavior has been odd lately. Carrying this worry alone has been hard. I discussed Tim's current state with Molly. Molly listened empathetically. And after I finished talking, Molly cheerfully said, "Nora, you've had it tough. Thanks for telling me. I'm here for you to talk to any time." I felt happy at Molly's kindness.
"Molly, thank you."
Then, I asked something that had been on my mind.
"By the way, what was the call from you about?"
It's rare for Molly to contact me. When I asked, Molly hesitated. "This is hard to say, but I'm pregnant."
"Really? Congratulations!"
I was truly happy about Molly's pregnancy. I honestly felt joy for my best friend Molly's pregnancy. Deep down, I want a baby too. So, while I congratulated her, part of me felt a pang of sadness.
"Thank you. I'll let you know when I give birth. Come celebrate in the hospital."
Molly seemed happy. And after that, we had some light conversation before hanging up. After the call, tears started rolling down my face. Molly was going to have a baby. But there was no sign of one coming to me despite my wishes. And the relationship with Tim, who was supposed to become a father, was cooling down. Indeed, there was no sign of Tim coming home today. Eventually, I spent the whole day crying alone. Some time passed, and I got a message from Molly.
"I gave birth to the baby. Please come and see. I want you to celebrate, Nora."
Congratulations, Molly. After receiving the call, I rushed to the maternity ward of the hospital where Molly was admitted. When I arrived at the hospital room Molly had told me about, the door was slightly open. I peeked into the room through the gap in the door to see if Molly was inside. That's when I saw a shocking scene.
"Why is Tim here?"
I muttered quietly to myself. For some reason, Tim was standing right next to the bed where Molly was sitting. And then Tim said something unexpected. "Molly, thank you so much for having our child," Tim said, tears in his eyes.
"I'm happy I could have Tim's baby. I can't wait for the three of us to live together as a family."
Molly looked up at Tim adoringly.
"Of course. There's no child between Nora and me. I'll divorce her right away and be with you." "Really? Thank you, Tim. I love you."
Molly spoke to Tim happily. I just glared at them in silence. I came to celebrate Molly's childbirth, only to find such a shocking betrayal.
"I will never forgive this."
I muttered quietly enough that the two in the room couldn't hear. Then I flung open the door of the room. Tim's face was filled with astonishment upon noticing my presence. And he was clearly flustered.
"Nora! Why are you here?" "No, there's an explanation for this."
Tim was clearly panicking, thinking about how to cover up the conversation I had just overheard. It was hard to believe this was the same person who confidently declared divorce a moment ago. I glared at Tim. And I stared sharply at Molly. "Nora."
"I'm sorry."
Molly apologized to me timidly. However, Molly smirked at an angle Tim couldn't see. As if to say she had one. Surely, she had intentionally called me to this scene. I never thought I would be betrayed in such a way by a friend I believed to be close. Such an infuriating woman. I deliberately said with a smile to both of them. Congratulations. The baby is adorable. You two should live happily together.
Huh?
Ignoring the stunned Tim, I said, well, I have things to do. So, I'll be leaving now. And left the room. I won't let Molly have her way. I was determined for revenge and immediately set into action. I went straight home. I packed only my belongings and immediately called a handyman service. Then, I made a bold request to the handyman who arrived. Please dispose of everything here right now, I said, asking them to throw away Tim's belongings. My belongings fit into just one suitcase. Only valuable items and clothes, that's all. The furniture and appliances were purchased by Tim. I had agreed to pay back the mortgage on the house in my name in exchange for Tim buying the furniture and appliances. So, they were all unnecessary for me. The disposal cost was quite high, but I planned to bill Tim and Molly for it later. Then, I contacted a real estate agency and requested an immediate buyback. To sell the house and land. Fortunately, the house was fairly new with little degradation. Plus, it was close to the station and convenient. Therefore, the purchase price was better than expected. I was worried because there was still a lot of mortgage left, but it seems I could offset it to some extent. Thanks to the handyman service, the inside of the house was emptied. Tape was put up outside to prevent trespassing. A for sale sign from the real estate agency was also placed. It was no longer my house. I felt a bit sad, but I just took my suitcase and went back to my parents' house. And 5 days later, it was about time for Molly to be discharged from the hospital. As I was thinking about it, my smartphone received multiple calls. The caller was Tim. Despite ignoring it, he kept calling. Hello. I reluctantly answered the phone.
Nora? Where are you now?
Tim sounded panicked as he spoke. I told him firmly.
It doesn't matter where I am, right?
You're only interested in Molly and the baby. You were hardly ever at home anyway. Perhaps because I spoke the truth, Tim was at a loss for words. But thinking that staying silent wouldn't progress the conversation, Tim began to speak hesitantly.
Molly was discharged with the baby, so I came back home only to find it turned into a house for sale. I was planning to live here. What's going on?
I was half amazed that he only noticed now. Plus, it seemed Tim intended to bring Molly and the baby to the house in my name. It was too ridiculous and appalling. At that moment, something piqued my curiosity. Where have you been until now? I would have expected him to call sooner. Yet, he only called today. That's way too late. Tim hesitantly answered.
At a hotel.
According to him, he stayed near the hospital all this time. For Molly after childbirth. Molly's hospital room allowed for mother and child to stay together, spending most of the time with the baby until discharge. But taking care of a baby right after birth is hard. So, Tim decided to help with the care during visiting hours. I was surprised to hear Tim's story.
You still had paid leave left? I thought you'd have used it up by now.
Tim always used up his paid leave as soon as he got it. Therefore, I was surprised that Tim still had any paid leave left. Then, Tim dropped a bombshell. Actually, I took paternity leave.
What?
I was dumbfounded upon hearing that. As I suspected, Tim had no paid leave left. So, he lied to his company to take paternity leave.
Paternity leave? For a child with your affair partner, you actually applied for it?
If it were for my childbirth, taking paternity leave would have been understandable. But the other party was Molly. It's unheard of to take paternity leave for the childbirth of an affair partner. It was beyond unreasonable. Then Molly, who seemed to be with him, retorted. It's fine because we're going to be a real family soon. Besides, we planned to kick Nora out and live in that house. Why did this happen? Molly complained over the phone.
My child-rearing plan is ruined.
She said something nonsensical. Molly planned to take the house and Tim from me and live a comfortable life. Truly appalling to listen to. I sighed deeply and said, "The house was in my name. If Tim and I aren't continuing our marital life, there's no need for me to pay for the mortgage, right? That's why I sold it to a real estate company," I explained, leaving Molly speechless.
What? Then where are we supposed to live? I already told everyone we'd move there.
Molly sounded slightly panicked.
I thought I could take everything from Nora. This is terrible.
She tried to shift the blame to me. Tim was also perplexed. Between Molly's hospital fees and staying at the hotel, all our savings are gone. We hardly had any savings to begin with, he mumbled. Blaming their mistakes on me was just wrong. I made it clear.
I don't care about your affair or your circumstances. Plus, the sale contract is already finalized, so if you enter the house without permission, it's trespassing. What?
Tim was speechless at my explanation. He probably hadn't thought it through that far. Molly seemed to be pressing Tim.
What are we going to do, Tim? We have a baby, we can't just sleep outside?
From Molly's tone, it was clear she was panicking. I could hear the baby crying over the phone. It must have been quite a scene. Amidst this, I remembered something. So, I kindly informed them.
Oh, by the way, I disposed of all Tim's belongings. What?
Tim sounded as if he couldn't comprehend. He must be unable to accept reality. I explained politely to Tim. The house sale meant your stuff was in the way. Plus, I don't need furniture or appliances bought by someone who cheated on me, and of course, I'll be demanding the disposal cost from you, I said, and Tim fell silent. Taking advantage of Tim's silence, I continued.
You should be hearing from the lawyer, so don't run away.
Then Molly snapped at my statement.
What? Why do I have to pay? We just had a baby, and we're going to have a lot of expenses.
Molly's attitude was one of complete disbelief. She lashed out at me, just because Tim broke up with you. You're ugly, not just in looks but in your heart too. This must be Molly's true nature. From the start, she never thought of me as a friend. I was just a convenient presence for her. But I wasn't going to just take it lying down. I explained firmly to Molly.
Molly, let me make this clear. What you did is a clear case of infidelity, and it's despicable. You went after a married man, so at least take responsibility financially. Ugh.
Molly gritted her teeth in frustration. I could even hear the grinding of her teeth over the phone. She must have been really upset. Molly, who had looked down on me in secret. Now the tables have turned, it was inevitable. And then there's Tim, another enemy. Tim didn't seem fully convinced either. I'm completely out of money. He said something like that.
The divorce between me and Tim is finalized. If you're not satisfied, could you go through a lawyer?
I said to Tim in a matter-of-fact tone.
Lawyer? I'm just going to be manipulated.
Tim muttered grumblingly. Then, Tim started saying something outrageous.
There was no child born between Nora and me. You have a job, so you'll be fine even if we divorce, right? Molly gave birth to my child. Are you a demon to corner us like this?
Tim was deflecting, completely ignoring his own infidelity. It was Tim who had said he wanted me to work until we had a child. And now, he's bringing up my job in this situation. It wasn't like I didn't want to get pregnant. I was frustrated beyond belief. Molly was no better, trying to lord her childbirth over me.
Indeed, Nora didn't get pregnant, right? If it weren't for me, Tim would have been childless forever. So, Nora should be crying and thanking me.
She said that to me without any hesitation.
Excuse me?
I was irritated by Molly's words. Why should I be thankful when it's Molly and Tim who did wrong? Truly, Molly and Tim are geniuses at irritating people. They must be two of a kind. Digging deep into someone's wounds. I sighed heavily. I couldn't let Molly and Tim win this. I spoke calmly.
I've already hired a private investigator. We have enough evidence of Molly and Tim's affair. If you want to argue further, we'll see you in court. As soon as I mentioned court, Tim and Molly started panicking. Court? If my company finds out, it'll be a disaster. You can't do that, right? We don't have time for a court case with a baby. Nora, you're just jealous because I had a baby. Such a narrow-minded person.
The tirade from Tim and Molly continued. Thinking these were the husband and best friend I had cherished made me sad. But I calmed myself and spoke to them calmly.
Anyway, the divorce is settled. Just wait for the notice from the lawyer.
I was about to hang up after saying that when I suddenly remembered something.
By the way, is the baby really Tim's? What do you mean?
Tim's response was baffled. He must trust Molly completely. Tim was head over heels for Molly. So, I don't think he's in a position to make a rational judgment. I just said what I was thinking.
Because it's only been about 7 months since Molly first came over, right? The timing doesn't add up. You and Molly met for the first time that day, didn't you?
When I asked, Tim said, yeah, but... Molly, thinking it was bad, cut into our conversation. Tim, we were talking about other things, right? We have to do something about that. She spoke to Tim. Her tone was clearly panicked. I thought so and informed them with a sense of conviction. If the baby's due date isn't significantly off, then it might not be Tim's child, right? Molly has always been surrounded by men, I said, and chuckled. Unless Molly had a very premature birth, it's almost impossible for the baby to be Tim's. I couldn't help but think how Tim could believe it was his child.
No way!
Tim's voice was clearly trembling. He seemed to have realized the irreversible mistake he had made. And then, with a voice turned pale, Tim confronted Molly.
Molly! What's all this about? This baby is really mine, right?
But Molly remained silent. Tim was questioning Molly.
If you look closely, the baby's eyebrows are very distinct, but both you and I have thin eyebrows, right? Explain properly.
I chuckled to myself. Molly's child couldn't possibly be Tim's. There's no way a future where the two of them are happily married would come to be. Leaving them as is, they're probably headed for ruin. I gently pressed the end call button. Eventually, the divorce between me and Tim was finalized. But it was quite a struggle to get there. Tim didn't want to agree to the divorce. No wonder. He was supposed to divorce me and remarry Molly, but that became impossible. The baby born to Molly turned out not to be Tim's after a paternity test. Upon closer inspection, Tim noticed several facial features that didn't resemble either of them. And later, it was revealed that Molly had been cheating with various men simultaneously. Molly had a history of infidelity, having been divorced by her ex-husband for that reason and returning to her parents' home. She had hardly ever been home, spending her nights out. Molly's parents were suspicious of her jobless, partying lifestyle, but couldn't kick her out as she hadn't caused any major problems until now. That probably made Molly even more brazen. She became even more devoted to her social life. Soon after, Molly's pregnancy was discovered, but naturally, the father was unknown. So, Molly chose Tim, who had a decent job. Among her other affair partners who were freelancers or worked for small companies with low salaries. They all looked good, which made them suitable for her flings. But with such men, a comfortable married life was out of the question. Hence, she targeted Tim. Molly planned to kick me out and live luxuriously off Tim's income. However, her plan failed when it was revealed the baby wasn't Tim's, leading to their separation. Moreover, I heard that among Molly's affair partners, there were other married men as well. Her parents were furious over this incident and disowned her. And then, they supposedly kicked Molly out of the house. Given Molly's past behavior, this outcome was inevitable. Molly's child is being raised by her parents. Probably because they knew Molly couldn't do it. Molly's parents will surely face a lot of hardship from now on, but I'm glad that the baby won't have to suffer. Molly has been missing since being kicked out of her home. The future of a woman in her late 30s without a home or job is easy to imagine. She's likely in a difficult situation. But it's all due to her own actions. I hope she reflects on them. As for Tim, after our divorce, he was fired from his job. The reason was the discovery of his fraudulent paternity leave. Taken to accompany Molly during her childbirth, an obviously unacceptable act. He had taken leave under the pretense of my childbirth. But with our divorce and the revelation that I wasn't pregnant, his lie was exposed to his company. After being reprimanded by his company, Tim had no choice but to explain the situation. He received quite a scolding and, it seems, was fired. I knew about this because Tim contacted me. I got a call from a payphone on my smartphone, and it was Tim. I tried to hang up immediately, but Tim, crying, begged me to listen. Reluctantly, I heard him out and learned what had happened. Through tears, Tim pleaded with me. Please, give me another chance. I've been fired, and I have nowhere to live. You're all I have left, Nora. Despite his tears, his words didn't touch my heart. After all, Tim was the reason for our divorce. I sighed heavily and said, I'm really fulfilled right now. There's absolutely no way I would remarry you, Tim. After telling the sobbing Tim not to call me again, I hung up. Then I went straight to the mobile carrier and changed my phone number. I probably won't have anything to do with Tim ever again. A year and a half has passed since then. I'm living very happily now. That's because I've found someone important to me. In fact, I remarried after going through matchmaking. Determined to be happier than Molly and Tim. And I married a man 3 years older than me, who is calm and works in accounting. He's serious by nature. Compared to Tim, he might look plain, but his faithful demeanor left a good impression. After dating for about half a year, my husband and I got married. But that's not the only reason I'm happy. I'm pregnant with a long-awaited baby. We don't know the baby's gender yet, but my husband and I are counting down the days until the due date. I remember crying out of frustration when I found out about Molly's pregnancy. Now, those events feel incredibly nostalgic. Marriage and childbirth aren't the finish line. I think that's where everything starts. I'm happy I can start this journey with my kind husband. I'm looking forward to living happily with my husband and our soon-to-be-born child. Hey, ugly. Is that your kid? A defective product just like her mom. These were the words thrown at me by my ex-husband, Sean, as he scrutinized me and my daughter, who was sitting in the wheelchair I was pushing, from head to toe, immediately upon our reunion after 13 years. I was about to retort with some foul language when Ken, my current husband, spoke up from behind me, "What's wrong with my daughter?" His deep baritone voice resonated so well that not only I, but also the people around us couldn't help but turn around. However, I might have been the only one to notice the chilly undertone in his voice. Looking back at Sean, I could see his face had turned pale. My name is Rika. I'm 35 years old. I'm a stay-at-home mom living with my 3-year-old daughter Natalie and my husband Ken, who is 3 years younger than me. The house we currently live in was originally built by Ken's parents. Right after Ken and I got married, my mother-in-law passed away suddenly from an illness, leaving her elderly husband living alone. We couldn't just leave my father-in-law by himself, so Ken's parents handed over the house they lived in to us and moved in with my father-in-law. However, one of the reasons, probably, was that they were worried about Ken's financial situation just after he had started his own business. They wanted us to live in their house without having to pay rent, which was a significant decision for us. I was overjoyed by my in-laws' kindness and, until Natalie was born, I used to visit my father-in-law's house every other day, helping with hospital visits and household chores. After Natalie was born, I slowed down a bit, but still made it a point to visit with Ken at least twice a month, helping out wherever we could or giving my in-laws a break to go relax at spa resort. My in-laws always expressed their gratitude, saying, "We're really thankful for all the help, especially during such a busy time with the baby," and Ken has indeed married a wonderful person. To me, no amount of effort could repay the kindness Ken's family, including his parents and twin sister, Sally, have shown me. They've saved my life not once but twice. Ken was marrying for the first time, but I had been through a failed marriage before. I met my first husband, Sean, when I moved to New York for university and started living in an apartment. We became friends as we moved in on the same day and shared information about nearby supermarkets, home improvement stores, and affordable restaurants. Sean attended a prestigious private university known for its stylish campus and media presence, quite different from my practical university. He was tall, handsome. He often said, "A lot of students at my university come from privileged backgrounds, making it feel claustrophobic for someone from the countryside like me. You and I are alike, it's easier because we don't have to put on airs." And so, he started to spend more time at my place, eventually leading to us living together like a couple. Back then, I couldn't believe I was dating a handsome guy like Sean and thought, I might not have the glamour of the female students on Sean's campus, but I can be a comforting presence. I ended up doing all the housework like cooking, cleaning, and laundry, which, in hindsight, was absurd. A man who seeks comfort right at the start of a relationship is hardly ever a good sign, as that comfort is purely self-serving. Because that comfort is just an abbreviation, but it is, in fact, the very egoism that makes it easy for him. But love is blind. I ignored Sean's selfishness, and when he said, "I want to quit my job because it's tough, but I can't afford to because I don't make much. My classes have gotten harder since I've advanced in my program," I suggested, "why don't we move into a slightly bigger apartment? Don't worry about the rent." So, we moved to a new apartment near our initial meeting place, and I ended up covering all the rent. Sean insisted on having 2 phone lines, one for him and one for me, claiming my dad got transferred to Europe for work around the same time I started high school, and my mom went with him. They're very conservative, and if they found out I was living with someone, they might stop sending money or even tell me to drop out. You wouldn't want that, and neither would your parents, even if we're planning to get married eventually. At the time, all I could think about was the prospect of marriage, not considering the implications of his request. This cohabitation put a significant financial burden on me. Since the apartment lease was in my name, I was responsible for not only the rent but also for utilities like electricity, gas, water, the landline phone bill, and internet charges, all of which were being withdrawn from my account. Initially, Sean had nobly offered, "Since you're covering the rent, I'll pay more towards the utilities." However, it wasn't long before he started saying, "Sorry, Rika. I'm short on cash again this month because of social obligations. With job hunting on the horizon, I can't afford to turn down invitations from friends in my seminar." And so, I ended up shouldering all the expenses. Before I knew it, I was also paying for groceries and even the beer Sean drank after his baths, with Sean's contribution being limited to the occasional delivery pizza when his friends came over to hang out. Moreover, whenever he invited seminar or club friends over, he'd tell me, "I haven't told them we're living together because it'd just lead to awkward teasing. You should stay away from the apartment for the day." Outside of university classes, all my time was consumed by part-time jobs and household chores, leaving me with no one to confide in, rant to, or seek refuge with, forcing me to spend nights at manga cafes or diners. The summers were tough, but waiting on a park swing in the cold early mornings for the time when I could return home, without enough money for warmth, I couldn't help but cry, wondering, what am I even doing with my life? As Sean and I reached our senior year and began job hunting in earnest, I finally snapped, accusing him of living like a leech. "You need to start contributing to our living expenses." Immediately, he switched to a soothing tone, "I'm so sorry, Rika. I've just been taking your kindness for granted. Please don't be mad at me." His attempt to appease me was blatant, but it only highlighted the imbalance in our relationship. The next day, Sean, unusually, came to pick me up from my part-time job. When we got back to the apartment, he had cleaned up the place and prepared a dinner he seemed to have gotten from a department store basement food hall, complete with a bouquet, wine, and even a cake. It was the first time I felt truly touched by Sean's thoughtfulness during our long relationship. He then presented me with a ring from a popular casual brand at the time, saying, "This is all I can afford right now, but someday I'll buy you a diamond worth 3 months of my salary." I remember blurting out a cliché about being the happiest I've ever been when he put the ring on my finger. But that was the only happy memory I had. Soon after, Sean said, "I'm torn between getting a job or studying abroad. But if things stay as they are, I'll just end up relying on you again, Rika. It's a critical juncture in my life, so I want to try doing things on my own for a while." And with that, he moved out to share an apartment with friends. Left suddenly on my own, I was anxious, but Sean left some of his belongings with me and still contacted me twice a day by email or phone, so I thought, I shouldn't mope around. I need to focus on my job search too. I managed to get an offer from my first choice company, a mid-sized trading firm, but around that time, I started receiving strange calls on the landline registered in Sean's name. Naturally, I'd hear the messages left on the answering machine, with ominous words like, "We'll be in trouble if you don't repay us by this week, and don't take us lightly." I quickly contacted Sean's cell, but he just brushed it off, saying, "It's nothing, don't worry about it." Then, letters began arriving in the mail, filled with words like payment reminder and final notice. When I confronted Sean more forcefully, he snapped, saying, "Stop nagging. I've been putting up with someone as ugly and defective as you this whole time, so the least you can do is pay this off as a thank you." After that, he stopped answering my calls. Deceived by his regular contact, I realized too late that I hadn't asked for Sean's new address. When I tried contacting his university, they refused to give me any information, saying, "We can't disclose that to unrelated individuals." Desperate for any clue, I opened some of the cardboard boxes Sean had left in the apartment. Inside were documents from several finance companies hinting at debts, old clothes with no resale value, and a used, outdated laptop. There was nothing that could lead me to Sean's parents' address or his current whereabouts, making me realize I was nothing more than a source of money to him. But things got worse when, not long after losing contact with Sean, 2 men in suits showed up at my apartment, informing me that as Sean's wife and guarantor for his debts, I was expected to repay them promptly. The additional blow at a time when I hadn't even recovered from the shock of being abandoned by Sean was enough to devastate me. It was Ken and his family who rescued me from this situation. That's why I've always wanted to do everything I can for my parents and Ken. However, as I was pushing my daughter Natalie's wheelchair through the mall, I had an unexpected reunion. That was with Sean, the man who had betrayed and abandoned me 13 years ago. He looked at me and Natalie rudely, then approached with an unpleasant smile. And the first thing he said was, "Hey, ugly. Is that your kid? A defective product just like her mom." I was about to lose my temper, not just at the insult to me but to my innocent daughter, when a man stepped in between Sean and me. It was Ken, my husband. "What's wrong with my daughter?" Ken asked, his voice carrying clearly. Passers-by stopped to see what was happening. But Sean, for some reason, turned pale and didn't retort. As Natalie and I looked back and forth between Sean and Ken, Sean, unable to withstand the surrounding gazes, snapped at Ken, "This is private. It's none of your business, right?" But Ken, unflustered, replied, "I'm involved because it concerns my family. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother speaking to someone like you." Then, turning to Natalie, he said with a smile, "Mommy and Daddy have some business to take care of. Auntie will be here soon to pick you up, so why don't you go to her house first?" Hearing that, I couldn't help but exclaim, "What?" However, Natalie, who is unusually composed for her age and not easily surprised, said, "Okay. Since it's a celebration, make sure you come early." Soon after, Ken's sister, Sally, arrived with her children, and Natalie left with them, leaving the scene behind. Then, Ken, losing the initial momentum and slightly stooping towards Sean, who seemed somewhat diminished by the confrontation, pressured with a half smile, "Let's have an adult conversation, shall we?" It's best we move somewhere else rather than providing a free show for the public. Sean, not particularly short but significantly overshadowed by Ken's near 6 feet 3 inches stature, and faced with Ken's unsmiling gaze, probably thought it better than being gawked at by onlookers and surprisingly agreed to Ken's suggestion to change locations. The three of them took a taxi and arrived at the building housing Ken's office. With the push of an elevator button and a glance at the tenant directory next to it, Sean realized they were headed to a law firm, which made his complexion turn pale again. But it was too late to run away, so he reluctantly joined them in the elevator. On his supposed day off, Ken appeared with a stern face, bringing his wife, me, and a guest, which surprised the office staff. However, by the time we were escorted to the back reception room, they had regained their composure. Watching Ken's profile, I too managed to calm my nerves. The only one who remained visibly restless and uneasy was Sean. Seeing Sean state, Ken, with a sly smile, placed a stack of documents on the table after asking a staff member to bring them and casually mentioned, "It's terrifying how coincidences work, isn't it? To think we'd meet the very person involved before showing this investigation report to the chairman." Sean's complexion grew even worse upon hearing this, but I had no idea what they were talking about. Noticing my confusion, Ken began to explain to both Sean and me. The chairman he mentioned was a major client of Ken's office, the current chairman of a machine tool manufacturing company. Recently, the chairman personally summoned Ken to the company's headquarters, where he was introduced to the chairman's youngest daughter, who had just returned from studying in the United States. The chairman had a special request. He wanted an investigation into a man's background to be kept confidential. And there, in the sales department, was none other than you, right? Sean Smith? Well, you were using a different spelling for Sean back then, Ken continued with a grin, making Sean's face grow even paler. Ken went on to explain that the chairman's granddaughter, while studying in France, had formed a relationship with a man at the same graduate school, promising each other a future together. This man had dropped out of a university just before graduating and moved to France to enroll in a local university. After graduating, he worked for U.S. company's local branch but left, seeking further education in graduate school. The granddaughter, a smart woman, had fallen deeply in love with this man, who supported her through the homesickness after enrolling in a French university. Having completed her master's degree earlier than him, she returned to Japan with him and asked her grandfather, the chairman, to approve their marriage and to consider him for a position in the family-owned company. The chairman was completely unaware of this man's existence around his granddaughter in France. However, the executive director, the chairman's daughter, had met the man several times during business trips to France and had been introduced to his parents stationed there. The executive director thought it too sudden for her adult daughter to marry and immediately join the family business as a future executive. So, after a private discussion between the doting grandfather and the executive director, they discreetly commissioned Ken's law firm, which had a long-standing relationship with their family, to investigate Sean. Feeling a bad premonition, I asked, "Don't tell me, that man isn't Sean, is it?" But before Ken could answer, Sean snapped back, "What? It's a problem if it's me. We've been over for ages, and who I marry has nothing to do with you." Sure, Sean was a part of my past I'd rather forget, and I had no interest in his current affairs, but there was plenty I wanted to say to him out of spite.
Separated, yes. But right before that, you filed for our marriage without my consent, made me a guarantor for your debts, then disappeared.
I shouted, and Sean seemed taken aback for a moment but quickly smirked. "You say that, but you wanted to marry me back then. I just made your dream come true, and in return, you helped a bit with my debts." Pointing at Ken, he continued, "I was worried when I had to update my passport at the embassy. But when I checked back here, I was relieved to find I was single. I never thought someone as ugly and defective as you would have someone else willing to take you in, so I was worried you might be waiting for my return." Just as I was about to lose my temper again, Ken stepped in. "I thought you had been quiet because you were reflecting, but a scumbag will always be a scumbag," he remarked, then smoothly explained how our marriage was annulled, leaving Sean officially single. It turns out, when Sean disappeared and debt collectors came for me, Ken's father, my father-in-law, was the first to offer me advice. One of my part-time jobs was tutoring, and at that time, my student was Ken's twin sister, Sally, who has now become my sister-in-law. Sally was a bright kid but had started to skip school due to being ostracized by her classmates. Hired by her concerned parents, I learned that Sally was excluded for standing up for a friend who was also being ostracized. Trying to cheer her up, I not only helped with her studies but also listened to her problems, which endeared me to her parents and grandparents, who began treating me like family. Sally happened to be visiting with her mother to share the news of her recommended admission to the college she wished for, right when the debt collectors showed up at my apartment. Shocked by my exhausted state and furious to learn about the marriage registration done without my consent and being made a guarantor for debts, she immediately contacted her father and grandfather, who brought me to this law firm. From there, my father and grandfather mobilized all their resources to resolve the situation. They started by filing for annulment due to the unauthorized marriage registration and negotiating with the financial institutions about the invalidity of me being made a guarantor against my will. It was a tough battle, but given their expertise in this field, they managed to successfully resolve both issues, I was told. Facing a lawsuit for annulment and dealing with stubborn financial institutions was a tremendous effort, especially as Sean was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, overwhelmed by this sudden misfortune, the shock of being abandoned by Sean, and the turmoil that jeopardized my college graduation and employment offer, I worried about how I could ever afford the attorney's fees. That's when my grandfather-in-law offered me a job at this firm, where I worked diligently. I was hoping to repay them in some small way. Despite my efforts to pay the attorney's fees, the Bar Association's regulations only allowed me to cover the actual expenses with a little extra. Thanks to their efforts, the marriage was ultimately annulled, and I was also released from being Sean's guarantor for his debts.
So technically, you're not Rika's ex-husband. You're just a blemish on her life,
they told Sean. Still, Sean seemed unable to grasp the gravity of the situation, retorting, "Well, having a marriage history with such a woman would be boring anyway. And as for the debts, they're probably statute barred by now, so it doesn't matter." At that moment, Ken burst into laughter. Facing Sean's confused reaction, Ken retorted, "The statute of limitations hasn't kicked in. I believe you'll be seeing some collection efforts starting this coming week." Sean might have thought that after 13 years, his debts were time-barred, but thanks to my grandfather-in-law, I was removed as a guarantor. The financial institution, unable to track down Sean, devised a plan and transferred Sean's debt to a debt collection agency they had ties with. In cases like Sean's, where repayment was dodged or delayed, making the bad debt unrecoverable, financial institutions often sell these debts to debt collection agencies. These agencies, then, are professionals in collections, employing all legal means possible, thanks to their extensive knowledge of the law. The agency that purchased Sean's debt was no exception, and after proceeding with various legal steps, a court judgment initiated by the collection company has reset the statute of limitations for another 10 years, making the debt fully valid today. Moreover, the total debt, now inflated with accrued late fees and legal costs, has skyrocketed to several times the original amount. Hearing this, Sean momentarily looked disheartened but then defiantly claimed, "Ah, such trivial money. Once I marry into that company's granddaughter's family and land a job there, it'll all be manageable." Such was Sean's shallow thinking. He probably assumed that marrying into the family as planned and securing an executive position at his father-in-law's company would make the debt repayment seem trivial. However, when Ken reminded him, "Do you remember what I mentioned earlier? Who had hired me to investigate you?" Sean's face turned completely pale. The truth is, Ken is Sally's twin brother. While I had little interaction with Ken when I tutored Sally, only exchanging greetings, Ken had developed an interest in me after hearing Sally sing my praises like a sister. Eventually, as I unexpectedly started working at the office and Ken, having passed the bar exam during his university years, began working there too, he proposed to me, considering marriage. Despite my past and owing much to my grandfather-in-law and his family, I initially refused, feeling it was improper. Yet, Ken revealed he had known about Sean all along and still wished to marry me, with the full support of his parents, grandparents, and Sally. By then, my parents, fully aware of my circumstances, also blessed our union, leading to a happy marriage with Ken. Unlike me, who wanted to seal away the past, Ken had harbored a desire for revenge against Sean for years. The request from the chairman was initially thought to be a coincidence of names, but further investigation confirmed that the Sean Smith, who was the chairman's daughter's boyfriend, was indeed the same Sean Smith who had discarded me like trash. Based on that, Ken was about to submit the report first thing next week.
You might have gotten away with it using different spelling overseas, but in here, it doesn't work that way. I heard the young lady noticed the difference in spelling when she saw your driver's license. You claimed it was because a fortune teller told you this version brought better luck, but in reality, you've been dodging responsibilities left and right, haven't you? After all, Sean is a very common name in the US, so you were probably planning to claim identity confusion if anything went wrong.
Ken said, admonishing Sean for thinking such shallow tricks would work on a lawyer. He revealed that he had already scanned and emailed the report to the chairman and his granddaughter. Adding to that, Ken said, since then, we've occasionally received inquiries from that financial institution, checking if they had located you. I've also informed them about your situation. Sean, suddenly dropping to his knees, begged, please somehow convince the chairman and the others that it was all a mistake. But Ken, with a sarcastic tone, questioned, why should I, a lawyer, tell such blatant lies to a client, especially when you've insulted my young daughter, who is in a wheelchair because of an injury, calling her ugly and defective. The truth is, Natalie's injury happened while she was on her way to violin practice. I took my eyes off her for just a moment, and she was knocked over by a high school student distracted by their phone. Since then, Natalie has been somewhat withdrawn, worrying Sally and her kids, who, upon learning that Natalie won a prize in an art competition, suggested, let's celebrate her achievement. Today was supposed to be for that celebration, but Sean's unexpected appearance turned it into a complete disaster. Ken, utterly doting on his daughter, was undoubtedly furious not just because of Sean's past actions but also because of the vile words directed at Natalie. Even as Ken coldly dismissed him, Sean, without any shame, continued to cry out loudly, pleading, please. The future of a man's life is at stake here. Are you going to ruin it? But Ken responded, ruin someone's life? Which right do you have to say such a thing? What you tried to do to Rika and the chairman's granddaughter was exactly the act of ruining someone's life. It's like the saying, curse others and you dig two graves. A boomerang that came right back at you. You should accept it gracefully. When Sean still tried to cling to him, Ken brushed off his arm and said, the exit is that way, calling the building's security to escort Sean out with a flick of his hand. As Sean's cries and resentments faded away, Ken and I exchanged smiles. Later on, Sean rushed to his girlfriend, the chairman's granddaughter, and made excuses, but she, already harboring suspicions, was outraged by the revelation of the truth and refused to see him again, effectively giving him the boot. However, the chairman and the executive director, upset over their beloved daughter and granddaughter being hurt, took further action. Sean, attempting to reconcile and bombarding her with messages and emails, was reported to the police for suspicion of being a fraudster trying to marry and infiltrate the company with a fake resume. While it didn't escalate to a criminal case, a warning was issued for the stalking. Sean, persistent in continuing his harassment, was eventually arrested and prosecuted. Though he received a suspended sentence with probation instead of jail time, the conviction meant he could find employment nowhere, not just outside of Tokyo but across the entire country, despite superficially returning to his normal life. Finding himself in a desperate situation, Sean once again tried to go to America, hoping to find employment there, but with a criminal record, he struggled to obtain a visa and had to give up on that plan. Moreover, after learning everything from the chairman and the police, his parents disowned him, leaving Sean truly alone. Facing unavoidable debt repayment, He tried to find odd jobs, but, without a smartphone due to being blacklisted, an expired driver's license, and no fixed address, decent work was impossible to come by. I heard through the grapevine that he ended up working for a shady handyman service introduced by the debt collectors, living in a dormitory with no privacy and working from dawn till dusk. But I decided to forget about it as soon as I heard, as it had nothing to do with me. On the other hand, Ken and I moved from our suburban house to a condo near the private elementary school Natalie plans to attend, once her injury had healed. Natalie, who has been averse to taking the train since the accident, liked the bus accessibility and the view from our high-rise apartment, seeming happier every day. The previous house was a remodeled version of Ken's parents' home, so when Ken suggested selling it to move, I worried about what his parents would think. However, they, enjoying their second life in a warm seaside town, told us, the happiness of our son, his wife, and our granddaughter is what matters most. Don't worry about us. They actually encouraged us to go ahead with the move. Being closer to my workplace means more time spent with the family than before. It was a good decision, Ken, enjoying the new life as much as Natalie, said. Watching them, I've been thinking about trying something new myself,